Next up, we've got some tech news for you. In Canada, Google Search and Google News will block local media from appearing. It's a drastic response to a new law passed last week. And here to explain more is our technology editor, Peter O'Brien. Hello there.
Hi, Charlie.
So why is Google doing this? What are they unhappy about?
They're not happy at all about this new bill that's passed. That's Bill C-18, or the Online News Act. It's intended to prop up a struggling Canadian news landscape. The Heritage Minister, Pablo Rodriguez, who brought the bill last year, said that since 2008, more than around 500 newsrooms have had to close across Canada. So that's the context. And the bill, which is due to come into effect before the end of the year, is to force big tech platforms to cut deals with local media, to essentially pay them to use snippets of their news on their sites. So even if this is simply a headline with a link to an article, the idea is that they'll cough up to use that because, of course, they've got lots of advertising that goes alongside this Google News content in particular. Although the wording of the bill remains vague as to which companies are targeted, it's pretty clear that it's Google and Meta. I mean, those are the two that dominate the online news and advertising landscapes. A report last October estimated that the Online News Act would see digital platforms shell out about 330 million Canadian dollars a year to these news sites. That's about 230 million euros. But the platforms don't want to pay up. So they're playing the hardest hardball you can imagine, with Meta last week saying that it would block Canadian news sites in Canada on both Facebook and Instagram. And now, of course, Google doing the same on its search and Google News platforms.
So it seems to be having the opposite impact as what was intended. But what does this mean for Canadians who rely on local news and for the local journalists who create this news?
One of the main ways that Canadians get their news is, of course, via Google and on social media. I mean, it's the same worldwide. It's the same in Canada. So by the end of the year, if you're Canadian and you Google what's in the news, you'll only see foreign media come up, even if it's about a local story. So you won't get CBC, no Globe and Mail, no Toronto Star. You'll still get France 24, of course, for what it's worth. And this will be the same on Instagram and Facebook. Of course, people will still be able to access these sites by putting the URLs into the address bar of their Firefox, Chrome, Edge, but it's an inconvenience. And Google's also ending its news showcase program, which had partnerships with local news organizations, 150 of them across the country. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this affects traffic to local media. Are people still willing to go and search out local news, given how used they are to simply having news pop up on their phone in a convenient manner?
Now, this isn't the first time we've seen major tech companies play hardball and bring out the lawyers. What are some other cases that we've seen similarly across the globe?
Well, it's the latest in a long battle between big tech and news publishers. In some jurisdictions, big tech are paying up already. A similar law was passed in Australia in 2021, and it was amended after Google and Facebook threatened to cut off their news services locally. In the year after it was passed, Google and Facebook reportedly paid out 200 million Australian dollars, that's about 122 million euros, to Aussie publishers. Meanwhile, here in the EU, France led the charge on a directive from 2019. It was very quick to transpose this into French law and start enforcing it. It slapped Google with a fine of €500 million in 2021 for not complying. And now in the EU, we've got a situation where many of EU countries have passed their own similar laws, and Google has struck deals with hundreds of publications around the block. Now, Google's arguing that Canada's law is broader in scope than those in Australia and Europe, and for instance, says it applies to outlets that don't even produce news, and it puts a price on merely having a hyperlink. It must be said, though, that their rhetoric of, quote, simply facilitating Canadians' access to news glosses over a rather important aspect, which is that Google makes a lot of money from this service because it has so much advertising alongside it.
I imagine that the tech companies are worried about setting a precedent of sorts, saying, if we give this to one country, what's going to stop every country from wanting it?
That's spot on, and similar regulatory efforts are well underway in other countries, not least in the US, where bills have been introduced in both Canada and on a federal level to try and get these tech platforms to pay up for publishers' content. As far as possible, Meta and Google want to avoid paying billions globally for something that they used to actually make money off, and this blackout we're going to see in Canada is their most drastic measure yet, so we'll see who blinks first.
France 24 tech editor Peter O'Brien, thanks for bringing us the story. I hadn't heard about it before.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.